Hi, and welcome everybody to this installment of the PHUSE Fall video series on open source technologies and clinical data analytics. Today, we are joined by Thomas Neitmann, who is an Associate Director of Data Science at Denali Therapeutics. In his relatively short time in the industry, he has been significantly impacting data analytics in the industry, particularly in the world of open source. So Thomas, welcome and thank you for joining us today for this installment.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Absolutely. Now, we met face to face for the first time at PHUSE US Connect in Orlando this year in 2023. But our first contact was actually the seed that started the Roche GSK collaboration for Admiral. In fact, I think you may be most well known in the industry for Admiral. So I was wondering if you could start by just giving the audience a bit of background on the why and the what of the Admiral family of packages.
Absolutely, yeah. So you kind of mentioned that this is a collaboration effort between Roche and GSK, but before we got there, internally at Roche, we were discussing our plans for open source, our adoption, and all these things. And we realized there is a gap when it comes to ADAM datasets. So we wanted to develop something. And I was fortunate enough to be picked as kind of the technical lead for this effort. And then in my excitement of getting this role, I think I posted something on LinkedIn, and then you actually reached out to me saying, you know what, GSK is following a similar path. Why don't we join forces? Which I think is a great example of what open source can enable. And so that kickstarted this collaboration. And I think that's now almost 3 years ago, I would say. So it's been quite a while. And it's not just one package anymore. It's a whole ecosystem. Other companies are involved. And it's really great to see what kind of an initial idea to develop something led to within this industry, and really, I would say, quite having an impact on how we do things. Yes, and Admiral's purpose is really to give you a toolkit for developing your analysis data sets according to CDISC standards in R. And then you take whatever you need out of that toolbox, build your data sets, and then with some other packages, which are part of the Pharmaverse, you can then ultimately build your compliant ADAM data sets, put them in a format that the FDA can accept, and then ship them as part of a submission.
Thanks. And if people want to hear more about Admiral, Thomas sat down with Phil Bauscher in Orlando, Phil from POSIT, for a great discussion around Admiral and other efforts that Thomas has been involved with. The link's included in the video description here for your convenience, so I encourage you to watch it. It's actually a really well done video. So Thomas, as a leader in this space, talk to me a bit about the why for open source. What do you see as the value of open source in pharma, and why should we care?
So I think there's a lot of aspects which you can tackle this from, but I want to talk about 3 ones in particular. And the first one being collaboration, which I already just mentioned. Just the fact that you are developing something as an open source project and rather than internally just within your organization suddenly enables you to collaborate across the boundaries of individual companies. And really, I think this is a great thing to have within our industry where, of course, we are all competitors in the sense that we want to get drugs to market faster than anyone else in the space. However, what we need to do in order to get there is more or less the same, regardless of whether you work. So we all have to follow certain standards like CDISC, put our data in that format, and then submit it to regulatory bodies. So really, this begs the question, why should each and everyone here put effort in developing these kinds of tools on their own, which has been kind of I would call it now the legacy model of how we did things. So as soon as you adopt open source technologies, like R, like a language as a base layer, I think people are very much inclined to then say, well, if we develop something on top of that, why don't we collaborate with others who have the same needs? And yeah, I think Admiral and the Pharmaverse in general are kind of great examples for that. So that is really point number 1, collaboration. Then I think another really crucial point to me is the point of transparency. So as the name suggests, open source means that the source code for whatever technology you're using is openly available. You can scrutinize it, you can look into it, peel under the hood, and really not only can you choose to trust the software like you could do if you get it from a vendor, but you actually have the ability to verify whatever is going on there. Now, does that mean that I look into each and every R package, for example, I use under the hood? Honestly, no, that would be a bit much effort, but just having the opportunity to do so, I think is really powerful. And certainly I have done so in the past, and sometimes that can be very enlightening to actually see how certain methods are implemented and whatnot. And kind of in a broader context of, not only are we kind of companies trying to generate revenue with our drugs at the end of the day, but we're also doing science, because each clinical trial is really a scientific effort to prove the hypothesis that whatever drug we develop actually benefits the patients in need. And I think this aspect of open science, where you're really not only sharing the results in a paper or a CSR, but the code behind that, the data and whatnot, is really crucial. And open source, to me, and the transparency are a huge part of that. And then a final point I would like to raise is that around having access to the latest and greatest technologies. Because if you rely on a vendor which develops closed source software, there's always a lag until, for example, a new statistical method has been published in a journal, until that comes into that particular software. But oftentimes these kind of papers, they have accompanying source code with them, whether it's in R, Python, or other languages. So if you want to get access to these kind of cutting edge methods, then you really need to embrace open source software. And there's so much great stuff that gets developed open source first. This whole AI boom that we're in right now really is only possible because the underlying tech stack is all open source. So yeah, if you want to get the latest and greatest technologies out there, really open source is the way to go.
I love groups of three. So collaboration, transparency, and access to the latest tech. That's great. Thank you for that. I do want to talk a little bit about quality and validation, because it's a big question that people ask a lot when looking at open source. And you exude a tremendous level of confidence in R and R-based solutions. In a PHUSE blog, I once wrote that we might never hear from a regulatory agency which tools are acceptable to be used for data analytics. They're never going to tell us this is okay or this is not okay. But rather, the onus is going to lie with the sponsor, to first have their own trust in their own tools, and then document why they actually trust their own tools in case they're ever asked or interrogated by a regulatory authority. So do you agree with this type of thought? And what do you see from your vantage point as the key challenges to establishing trust in solutions built by an individual or the community in open source?
No, absolutely. I do agree. And on that point of, you will never hear a regulator giving you sort of a rubber stamp on this is an acceptable software. I think that's actually a good thing, because I don't think a government agency should be in the business of telling us what are the good tools to use for our data analysis. That being said, though, it's very much correct that whatever tool you use, you should have tremendous trust in them, especially in this area we work in. I mean, the kinds of analysis that we do, they decide at the end of the day whether a drug is both safe and effective for patients. You don't want to do any mistakes within that. So you better trust the software. But going back to what I said, it's even better not to only just trust what you are using, but actually going in and verifying that. And I think this is been sort of something that people had to wrap their head around when it came to open source. I feel like when you get something from a vendor, you are more on the side of, well, this is a third party which actually develops that. They put a lot of documentation together and whatnot. So you are very much inclined to sort of trust them. Whereas with open source, quite honestly, there is varying degrees of quality of what you get. So if you think of something like R, the core of the language itself is probably the one thing I would have the most trust in, because it's so robust and has been around for so long. And then there are certain extension packages like the ones that POSIT develops, which are really designed and maintained in a, I would say, industry best practice way. But then there is maybe an R package that some graduate student wrote as part of his thesis, which can have much less quality. So you really need to go in and scrutinize whatever you want to use and make sure that it is adherent to whatever criteria you have set out. And now on the point of defining these kinds of criteria, this is again a place where, fortunately, not each organization decided on their own, like what are these kind of criteria, but people came together and actually discussed that. And so I just want to mention here the R Validation Hub, which is kind of a group of companies getting together and talking about how can we validate our packages, how can we establish this kind of trust, have a common set of criteria that we all agree upon, and then based upon that decide whether a package is actually fit for purpose for what we do, or whether we should not use it at all, or maybe do some changes to it. So yes, this is quite an effort you have to take, but I think it's very much worth it. And in a sense, whether you are using open source software or stuff that you get from a vendor, you always need to have a certain amount of checking in that and make sure that whatever you are getting actually does the job. So while that is maybe not the most exciting piece that people like to do, it is crucially important, and it's great to see the efforts within that space. And now people talk about things like having maybe a farmer-specific repository of R packages, which have gone through a process that industry has agreed upon, such that this has not to be done again within each individual company. Yeah, I think this is an exciting time actually to be in this space, and I'm very much watching what is going on in there.
Thank you. And speaking of, the next week is the virtual R Pharma event with workshops actually going on this week. It's not a FUSE event, but in the interest of pharma open source community, I still want to know, like, you're attending it. Why should people consider attending the R Pharma virtual event that's going on next week?
Yeah, I think if you are someone who is using R or any kind of open source technologies within the context of clinical trials and pharma, this is probably the event to attend. It is free to attend from wherever you are in the world. It's a virtual conference. And not only can you watch talks, as you have mentioned, but also this week there are these workshops ongoing where you can really dive deep into various topics and hear from thought leaders, engineers who are working on cutting edge tools and see what they've come up with. And you can really learn a lot. And while I think our conferences in general are exciting, this one really being focused exclusively on pharma is probably one of the events I'm most looking forward to throughout the whole year. Obviously, the FUSE Connects are number one, but after that, R and Pharma is a very close second. So I would very much encourage anyone who is even remotely interested in open source and R to attend this conference.
And it's great to have seen the communities come together over the last 4 to 5 years, and then things starting to merge. You see the leaders in the different spaces starting to collaborate as well. So the last thing I want to talk to you about was simply what's next for Thomas. Are you working on anything big right now? Anything we may see in the near future that you want to give us a bit of a teaser on?
Yeah, so I mean, I recently switched roles, and that has unfortunately put a little bit of brakes onto my open source efforts, because as you can imagine, joining a new organization, there's a lot of stuff you have to first establish internally. That being said, there are some really exciting efforts ongoing, which I am definitely looking at closely and also trying to commit some time to contribute. And one in particular I would like to highlight is this effort going on for automating SDCM mapping, the OAK project, which the CDISC Open Source Alliance is kind of, I would maybe not organizing, but kind of putting it under their umbrella. And then you have companies like GSK, like Roche, Vertex, Pfizer. So again, really a collaboration of multiple pharma companies coming together and then asking for volunteers from the kind of broader industry. And there have been over 100 people signing up. I've been in some of the webinars and workshops that have been going on as part of this effort. And it was really great to see the enthusiasm that is going on there. And I'm really excited for what is coming out of that effort. I think this is something, again, which the whole industry could benefit tremendously upon, because mapping SCTMs is a big part of our job. It may not be the most exciting thing, but it's definitely very much required. So anything that can help us all to streamline and automate this, I think is a very, very worthwhile effort. But then if you just look at the broader Pharmaverse, there are a lot of efforts going on, also some much smaller efforts, little packages that people develop. And I think it's just fantastic to see that. I feel like people now are much more inclined to start developing these kinds of solutions in open source, whereas a couple of years ago, it was probably tinker a bit internally, get some kind of POC together, and only afterwards put it out as an open source. But that somewhat hinders collaboration, because then to some extent, you already have a half-baked product, and another party may have different design opinions, for example, and then see that kind of as a burden to collaborate. So yeah, just watching the space, seeing where I can have some impact as well. But it's just great to see how many people are engaged in this now, and that it's not, a small group of individuals, but really kind of maybe you could call it even a mass movement within our little niche of industry. So very exciting.
Great. I can't thank you enough for joining us for this installment, Thomas. It's been great talking with you and hearing your thoughts. For those that are watching, you can follow Thomas on LinkedIn. He's always connected to all the new happenings that are going on in the industry, and I'm sure you'll see him at a PHUSE event in the near future. So, Thomas, thank you.